What's going on, fam? Good morning. CA for Jesus here, back with another off the cuff. So today's title, Learning New Things by Studying the Past. So there's a phrase in Japanese, or a word, I guess, onko chi shin, which means learning new things by studying the past. Now, I don't really understand the Old Testament very well. It's there's a lot of detail, there's a lot of stories, there's a lot of dialogue, there are a lot of characters. The names aren't common names we hear nowadays, and so I tend to not have a lot of patience with the Old Testament. Plus, I've had this mindset of, okay, well, we're not under the old covenant, we're under the new covenant, which is true. However, there's still so much to be learned from the Old Testament, and so much that we still can apply to our lives today. And so I've ran through the New Testament at least 3, 4, maybe 5 times, and it's so dense, and there's so much happening in a quick span. There's so much wisdom. There's so much. There's a lot of supernatural events going on, and so it's really captivating, and it's so dense, and there's so much to be learned. And I think it's great for people who are newer to the faith, but now at this point I'm realizing, okay, well, there's still so much to be learned from the Old Testament. I mean, it's 3/4 of the book is the Old Testament. The Bible, 3/4 of the Bible is the Old Testament. So it would not be wise to disregard it. I mean, so I just started going through the book of Genesis. I'm exploring other books that I haven't dove into yet, like Kings, Ezekiel, Lamentations. I've gotten, so far I've gotten through Genesis a few times. I've gotten through Deuteronomy a couple times, Job a few times, and of course Proverbs is amazing. Ecclesiastes is becoming one of my favorite books in the Bible. Matthew's still my favorite, but Ecclesiastes in terms of the Old Testament. But Proverbs was always a classic too if you're looking for wisdom in this season. But guys, we're now getting into the heart of the fall season. It's cold. The days are getting shorter, so it's darker. People are staying in more. This is a good time to just really, really get into the Word, okay? We had a very, eventful summer, and I think, that was a good time to really dive deep into the New Testament. But now that things are slowing down, cooling off, days are shorter, it's colder, so we're going to be staying inside more. So it's a good time to really dive in deep on the Old Testament. Take your time, study it, really absorb it. It's not about, how much we read. It's not about the quantity, it's the quality of the time that we spend reading. And we can always learn something new by studying the past. And so I'm really looking forward to diving in deep to the Old Testament, because there's so much more to be learned. I mean, the learning never stops, right? But I'm discovering so much, and the Old Testament is just, parts of the New Testament could be pretty raw, pretty offensive. Scripture does not care about our feelings, but the Old Testament is even more raw in certain situations. And Christ didn't come to get rid of the law, but to fulfill it. Now, there are things that, obviously being under a new covenant, it's like, okay, well, in the Old Testament, for that time, they were doing what worked at that time, but then Christ said, okay, you're doing this, this, and this right. Here's where we need to improve. Here's what we need to adjust. So, but what Christ confirms in the New Testament, I mean, we can't read the New Testament without understanding the Old Testament. We just can't. Like, you can't read Revelation, for example, without reading Daniel. And yeah. And you can't read, for example, like, you can't read Matthew, Mark, and Luke without also understanding Ezekiel. There's a lot of cross-referencing there, and so we need to understand the Bible in full. And now is the perfect time to dive into the New Testament while we have time, just being at home more on these colder days where we're just going to be inside, where it's darker for longer. It's just the perfect time. So let's learn new things by studying the past. I love y'all so much. Have a great weekend.